All right, very good. Thank you all for coming to the um, slideshow presentation of my Instagram carousel, Buddha's Four Noble Truths for Trippers. This is stuff that I like to talk about a lot. You know, this is a topic that I think is very, very valuable. And so I do like sharing about it, you know, in all transparency. I have a 6-week class on psychedelic meditation that I believe a few of you have taken, Michelle, Amelia. Maybe you give us a testimonial towards the end. So I will be pitching that at some point, but of course, this is freely offered. I'm happy you're here, and there will be, you know, no hard sell. Um, so let me. So there's the pitch. It starts on June 4th. It's 6 weeks on Tuesday. It includes meditations, weekly meditations on Monday and Wednesday. There's a neat community that's kind of still growing. It's kind of fresh, but we use a mighty network. If you would like, there's an ongoing practice group, like a monthly subscription practice group thing. And you can save $100 with, I meant to change that coupon, with the coupon haha or noble 100. So that's that. And there's a link to it. You can also go to tamintegration.com and it'll be there, but if you're into QR codes, there's the QR code. To start the class, if you don't mind, I generally like to set an intention, right? We know that intention setting is important in psychedelic space. It's also important for all of our spiritual practices. And this is one that I learned from one of my teachers. And it is for arousing bodhicitta, which is what we're basically doing, is creating an intention for loving kindness and the benefit of all beings. And so the way it goes, I'll just describe it briefly and then I'll say it, and you can breathe into it or not as you like. But when it says awaken to awareness, right? So there's a commitment here. It's like a little stronger than an intention. It's a commitment to awaken to awareness. And what's nice about this phrase is that it's a recognition that the awareness is already there, that it's inherent essential. It's an inherent essential part of you. I can't give it to you. You can't buy it. You can't lose it. You can just forget or remember, right? And so what we're doing is we're saying, I'm gonna remember. I'm gonna awaken to the vastness of my primordial mind. And I'm not just doing it for me, I'm doing it for everybody. Like I know one of my teachers would say, if you get enlightened, you're one less problem for everybody you know, which I think is adorable, right? So we do it for everybody, right? And that's important, right? It's important to create less suffering and more loving kindness in the world. And then also we recognize that it's possible, that we can do it. You might not think it's possible. There might be a voice in the back of your head that says it's not possible. But we're going to affirm the resourceful, committed part of ourselves. We're going to affirm that it is possible. And not only that, it's impossible for me, right, here and now, regardless of conditions. So whether it's hot or cold, or whether our bank account is big or small at the time being, or whether we're sick or we're well, or we're here or we're there. So awareness is, since it's essential and immutable, it exists everywhere at all times, regardless of external conditions, which is nice. So I vow now, and you can breathe with this as you like or not. I vow now to awaken to awareness for the benefit of all beings. I realize its immeasurable importance, and I believe this is possible for me, here and now, regardless of conditions. Cool. We'll circle back to why this is important when we get to Noble Truth 4. Thanks for participating that with me. Oh, a little bit of my bio, right? I do things like this. I've got a year-long program, 6-week program. I do coaching, all that kind of stuff. This is some of the reciprocity that I'm involved in. These are, for the most part, these are kind of Hindu things, but you know, I do support Buddhist projects as well. These are things that I like to support because I've gotten a lot from it, and I like to cultivate relationships with people who are from the places where I get a lot of my wisdom. If you want more information about this or how you can help or start to build relationships and create reciprocity, I'm happy to talk to you about that outside of class. A little bit of my lineage as well, right? Grateful Dead, Psychedelics, and Ram Dass, right? And then also here are some of my Buddhist teachers, some who I've worked with closely, some who I've just read their books. Arousing Bodhicitta up here in the left corner are Sarah and Tai Powers. These are the people who taught me that prayer. I've also done some studying with Lama Sultan Maleon. This is Suzuki Roshi, who wrote the great book Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, which I highly recommend. I worked with this guy, Tokul Sanak. He's a brilliant guy. And then Thich Nhat Hanh was one of my early introductions to Buddhism through his amazing, amazing books. And who is, some of what I know about the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path I've gotten from studying his work. So this is the Buddha as a baby. Just so we know, like, who is the Buddha, right? He's got Four Noble Truths. Who is this guy? So he was born to a royal family, and he had all of these auspicious signs. It looked like he was going to do great things. It is said that where he walked, lotus flowers would blossom, and that he had this radiant glow to him. And so in his young life, he was surrounded by people who took very good care of him. He was in a palace. He had everything he could ever want. He didn't know suffering, right? He was shielded from suffering as much as anybody could be, right? He was having a good trip, right? And then one day, as teenagers do, he rebelled and he snuck out. He snuck out of the palace and he went into the town. And he was shocked by some of the things that he saw in the town. He saw up in this upper left corner, somebody who was sick. He had not seen a sick person before. And he asked his driver, even though he snuck out, he still took the car. He asked his driver, what do you mean, how'd this person get sick? Like, how does that even happen? Like, what kind of person gets sick? And his driver was like, dude, everybody gets sick. He was blown away. And then he saw an old person, which he had never seen before. And he asked, it's like, how does that even happen? Who gets old? And his driver, it's like, dude, everybody gets old eventually. We're all gonna be subject to the infirmities of age. And then in the upper right-hand corner, he saw somebody who had died. And he was like, well, what is even that? Like, how does that happen? And the driver was like, again, man, like, you got to get out more. Like, everybody dies. Like, there's no avoiding sickness, old age, and death. And he was shocked. And then he saw somebody who seemed unperturbed by all of it. He saw somebody who was established in wisdom and equanimity, right? A meditator, a yogi. And he, went and talked to the yogi, and the yogi said, okay, we're working on, that's just the deal is, we're trying to transcend suffering through our practice. We're trying to transcend suffering, not just for ourselves, but for all beings. And so there was also the spirit of altruism. And probably, the yogi gave him other teachings as well. And the Buddha was like, okay, I want this. Like, this is what I'm going to do. And he left home, and he had various adventures that culminated with him achieving, penetrating the furthest gate of the Dharma, as it were. So he attained enlightenment. He overcame egoism, greed, hatred, craving, ill will, these sorts of things. And then he went on to teach and spread this way, the Dharma. One of the things that he taught about was the Four Noble Truths, as it were. Right. So the Four Noble Truths, which you may have seen on Instagram, he would say that suffering is an inherent part of life. And the way I rephrase it is sometimes we have bad trips, right? And so the bad trips could happen, in or outside of medicine space. Sometimes newbies will come to me and they're concerned about bad trips. What if I have a bad trip? And generally what I tell them is the psychedelic is much more likely to reveal that you've been on a bad trip for the past 3 decades than it is to give you one. And that the psychedelics often amplify what is already going on in your mind and in your heart. And they're like, oh, which is kind of really, I think, an important framing for a lot of us, is that we are often kind of living a life that is somewhat tortured by uncreative, negative thinking that is often repetitive, and we kind of don't really know how it got there. We kind of don't really know how to get rid of it. So the second one, often we call a trip bad when it doesn't go the way we wanted it to. And, the Buddha would say that, craving and grasping is the cause of suffering, right? Basically wanting things to be different, right? And so the third, there's a way to not feel so bad when a trip doesn't go the way we want it. And so we can get out of suffering, right? We can suffer less by being less attached, by craving less, by being less attached to the outcomes. And then, the way to not have a bad trip is to not focus on what you wanted, but on what you can learn from the experience and how it might benefit others. In other words, integration. Basically, if you have a good integration practice, that could turn a bad trip into just a difficult learning experience, right? It's just we're using language in different ways. But instead of being so attached, like it has to be the way I want it, I really want things to be the way I want them. And if not, I'm going to be mad and upset. Be like, okay, a thing happened. Perhaps I can learn from it. Perhaps the things I learned from it can make me more kind and more compassionate and of greater service to others, right? And so if we look at these real quick, is that there's kind of 2 parts, right? So part 1, like 1 and 2 go together and 3 and 4 go together. So it's bad trips, or it's like suffering and why we suffer, and then it's like well-being, good trips, and how we can get them, right? 2 parts. Make sense? Cool. Let's talk about good and bad are 2 sides of the same coin. You can't have one without the other, right? Does everybody know this quote by Humphrey Osmond, one of our early American psychonauts? He said, to fathom hell or soar angelic, just take a pinch of psychedelic, right? And what we know about, so he's got both, right? Something bad, something good, something hellish, something heavenly, right? So he recognizes that it can go either way, and sometimes it can even turn on a dime. And the way it turns on a dime is because of our state of mind, right? We know what psychedelic means, right? Psychedelic is mind manifesting. I mean, you can define it in several ways, but psyche, the mind, manifesting, right? And so we are manifesting a hellish experience or an angelic experience based on our quality of mind, right? So one of the things that is really important for us to recognize, especially if we kind of have perhaps like a new age bent to us, or, we read The Secret, or, we're into manifestation or something like that. Sometimes we think, or just we're in self-improvement in general, we might think that we might be able to exclusively manifest pleasant experiences. Like if I eat right and I do yoga and I listen to sacred music, and I do all, if I've got my whole biohacking list in order and all my meditation practices in order, then only good things will happen, quote unquote good things. That's not possible, right? Things happen in general. And what we find is that we call things that we like good, and we call things that we don't like bad, right? I'm sure I'm not the only person who's been on a road trip with somebody who had different taste in music. And what they thought was good, I thought was bad. And what I thought was good, they thought was bad. You may have seen the Instagram reel about, um, just to elucidate this a little more. I used to hang out with, so like I was sort of, in high school, you've got like you get you're really into your identity. You are kind of like a caricature of yourself. Well, like, I was like I was kind of like a hippie, but then I also hung out with punk rockers. And the reason that I hung out with punk rockers is that we both liked acid, right? So it's like it's the great equalizer. But what would end up happening is that we would argue over music a lot because they wanted to listen to punk rock music, and um, I thought it was unpleasant. I thought it was bad. I didn't like it, and they didn't want to listen to Jimi Hendrix or Pink Floyd or the Grateful Dead, um, and uh, and they thought that was bad. We could all agree on Prince, so we ended up listening to a no small amount of Prince. Um, so do you see how this works? And this creates suffering by pushing and pulling against reality. And basically, it's our fault. So there you have it. We don't flow with reality. We're not accepting of reality, right? Um, the trip didn't go the way we wanted it to. The trip was painful. The trip made me look at things about myself I didn't want to look at. The trip was confusing. Other people that I didn't really like were part of the trip, right? Other people did things to me that I didn't like during the trip. Um, and so we have, again, we grasp towards things we like and we push away things that we don't like. And so there's this constant chasing things that we think are pleasant, and it's constant running away from or fighting things that we think are unpleasant. And we often tell ourselves stories that like, oh, like when I finally get this, or I achieve this, or I have this title, or I have this certification, then it'll be okay. We're constantly projecting into the future instead of being like, this moment is a good moment, right? This moment is a good moment. And so it's hard. And so we end up being, again, kind of responsible for our own state of mind based on our own ability to control our mind and our emotions. So the thing about, notice that I didn't say your fault. So it's our fault. It's not just your fault. Sometimes um, there is this idea of karma gets hyper individualized. And we think that like, oh, it's not like, maybe somebody is not nice to us in some way. And then, one of your spiritual bypassing friends will be like, oh, that's your karma. You manifested that because of this, that, and the other thing. And maybe kinda, but also like Earth is crowded, as Kurt Vonnegut said. Like Earth is crowded and we are, and even the Buddha talked about interconnection, right? Interdependent co-origination. Right. Okay. So what this means is that we're making it up together. Like our collective greed and hatred is kind of all in the same, we're often in the same pot. And we kind of can't overlook that. And that's tough. But so what I see is there's this really interesting thing. We go over it in the year-long training called polarity management. And what this says is that often there are two things that are seemingly disparate or at odds, but if we look at it right, we can kind of see that we need both. So sometimes there are people who are hyper individualized and they would do well to understand more about social interconnection and kind of the social forces at play and how, um, in fact, like the vow of the bodhisattva, which you may have heard. A bodhisattva, I'm getting a little off track, but a bodhisattva recognizes that we can't be enlightened until everybody's enlightened. And so they actually kind of forgo going to the next place until they help everybody else figure it all out at once. Right. So that's kind of a collective liberation thing. Um, and so if we're hyper individualized, we think, oh, it's all me, it's all me. I have to make it happen. It's like, no, it's like we have to make it happen. We might want to lean into that a little bit more. But sometimes people are really focused on the collective And they can, there can almost become like a victim mentality that happens, right? Where it's like, oh, this is, all of the forces are affecting me and I can't do anything about it. And there's this kind of abdication of personal responsibility. And that, sometimes some of those people need to like investigate more what they can do to tone up their own minds and their own ability to be present. This is just a thing to consider. All right, let's so number 3, the end of suffering. So there's a way to not feel so bad when a trip doesn't go the way we wanted it to. And so this is to start to practice disconnecting our internal state from external circumstances, right? Most of us live as an effect, right? If you look at cause and effect, we're like, oh, that thing happened, so I must feel this way. And then that thing happened, so I must feel this way. In the Bhagavad Gita, I'm switching a little bit, but this is very interesting. Krishna says, that one is established in yoga when they are indifferent to praise and blame, right? One is established in the self. It's another way of saying like somebody is grounded and centered, right? It's like you're gonna have a good trip if you're indifferent to praise or blame. Other people telling you you're good, other people telling you you're bad. It's none of your business anyway, what they think in a lot of ways, right? So what we can start to do is become the cause of our own effects, right? And so we become the cause of our own effects by following the Eightfold Path, right? But by starting to get our speech together, our actions together, our thinking together, our meditation together, right? So kind of recognizing what our intentions might be, arousing bodhicitta, right? Awakening to awareness for the benefit of all beings, or whatever it is for you. I'm not saying that has to be it for you. And coming from a place of those values and intentions, right? So we don't have to hate not getting what we want. Right? I didn't get what I want. Okay. Right? We don't have to hate getting what we don't want. Right? So the idea is to practice working on feeling happy unconditionally. Ah, this talk is going to be shorter than I thought it was. But that's okay. We have time for discussion or questions as well. So again, instead of worrying about what we want and getting it or not getting it, we think about how we can grow in wisdom. What can I learn from the experience? Right? How can what I learn be of benefit to others? How can I go out into the world and serve others? We know that there's so much to learn even when a trip is difficult. Sometimes what is nice about a psychedelic trip is that a lot of times our karmas are very sped up, right? So sometimes we don't see the results of our thoughts and our emotions for days, weeks, months, years later. It all builds up. But sometimes in psychedelic space, we can see that immediately. There was one, if there's a story, I just love it so much. You've probably, if you've heard me tell it, if you've been in another thing. I was in a ceremony once and I had fear, right? And I thought, oh, something bad is happening. Something bad's about to happen. I'm looking around and like everybody seems threatening and menacing, right? Everybody seems kind of dangerous. I'm pretty sure they don't like me. And I'm pretty sure I don't belong there. And I'm pretty sure soon somebody is going to let everybody know that I shouldn't be there and I don't belong there. This is all coming up. And I can see the judgment that they all have for me as well. Oh, that person doesn't like me. That person doesn't like me. And I can hear what they think is wrong with me. Is anybody drop into some kind of you know, some kind of laughing emoji if you can relate to any of this. Anything like this has ever happened to you in a group. So anyway, there I am. Convinced that something awful is about to happen and I don't belong and all of these things. And then the voice, right? That there's a Jerry Garcia voice. There's a Jerry Garcia song called Gomorrah, and it's about Lot being told to leave Gomorrah by God. And the line, it's he says the same. I heard a voice, and in this case it's Lot. So I heard a voice telling me to flee, the same old voice I always believe. Right. So it's the same that I've heard the voice, the same old voice I always believe. Um, maybe drop a microphone in the chat if you've got that, if you know that voice. And so anyway, the voice says to me, what if you try unclenching your fists, dropping your shoulders, and relaxing your jaw and taking a breath? And I was like, am I doing all that stuff? And the voice said, yeah, you're doing all that stuff. Take a breath and relax. And I took a breath and I relaxed, and all of that stuff left. It had nothing to do with any of those people. Like that was all my stuff. That was all my old thoughts and all my old emotions and all my old self-beliefs that still show up from time to time, of course. But it was coming to the surface to be seen and released by the grace of a little bit of meditation practice and a little bit of sacred medicine, right? And so that is kind of what we're hoping for. And it would be easy for me to like say, oh, it would have been better to not have felt that fear, right? Oh, it would have been better to not have had to feel that unworthiness for what felt like 6 hours, but was probably 5 minutes, right? Um, it would be weird to say, oh, that would have been better when I was able to learn from that. And then perhaps even humbly, it's my hope and desire that that story even benefits you somehow, right? And so we become of service, and also, right, recognizing that I had been carrying it around for a long, long time, that it wasn't actually new, that the molecule didn't make that happen. The molecule was just like, hey, time to take out the trash. And so we're getting into what we might call having a right view of things, right? Seeing things from a less um, selfish and immediate pleasure kind of way, right? Right, like immediate, like everything has to be good all the time. Like everything should be pleasant and comfortable and easy for me all the time, as opposed to recognizing that sometimes things are difficult. This is okay. Sometimes being compassionate is difficult. Recognizing that other people have their own emotional lives and their own issues, and being respectful and kind in the face of that can be difficult. But that's right view, is having a view of compassion, having a view of understanding, recognizing that we are not separate from the primordial nature of mind, right? We're not separate from the greatness of wise spaciousness, right? Having that right view. And so from that right view, thoughts, words, and deeds, right? Can we then think thoughts, speak words, and perform actions that are in alignment with that, right? That express compassion and understanding. And sometimes we might even be able to kind of do the right thing. We start to, and of course there are, there's even kind of social norms and laws that sometimes help us. We get kind of conditioned to behave in a way that is perhaps right. It can be much more difficult to um, use right thinking, right? To notice when we're thinking, Oh, I don't like those people and those people don't like me. Oh, I'm mad that this played out the way it played out. And starting to recognize that anger and ill will and hatred kind of are planting seeds of future suffering, right? And somebody might say, well, that's what I really think. I mean, kinda wait, this requires more mindfulness, right? This requires perhaps more investigation. And one of the things that we might find is that we can change our mind a lot. Has anybody ever changed their mind? There's a book about it, how to change your mind, right? This is what we want to do. We want to be able to change our mind. There's a neat book that I, lightly suggest for meditation for the journey called Prometheus Rising. Prometheus Rising is a book by Robert Anton Wilson, and it's a owner's manual for your nervous system. And one of the exercises is go down the opposite reality tunnel. Like we know, for example, that we're very polarized with what we believe in this country, and politically, for example. And that if you watch that a thing can happen, just a thing happens in the world, right? And then NBC reports on it and Fox News reports on it, and you get two different stories, right? And then there's other people report on it and they have their own stories as well. And so one of the things that Robert Anton Wilson suggests is like, well, whatever news you're more comfortable with, watch the other one until you think to yourself, they might have a point, right? Recognize that the mind can be pretty malleable. And so if the mind can be, and we hear about people getting radicalized or de-radicalized, and they go to this side or that side and all this kind of stuff. So why not radicalize yourself towards loving kindness and compassion? And if that means that you have to immerse yourself in those teachings, and so be it, right? You could turn off all the news, right? You could turn off all the news and just you keep yourself very busy with like Thich Nhat Hanh and Alan Watts and Tara Brach talks, all recorded. There's hours and hours and hours of Dharma talks online. And how will I know what's going on? We don't know what's going on anyway. There is, anybody know Duncan Trussell? Ever heard of him? It's like kind of a psychedelic comedian. During the pandemic, he got a little famous for a quote that said, somewhere there's a guy under a waterfall with no cell phone who has no idea how angry and afraid he's supposed to be. Right. And again, I'm not saying to go back to the intersection of personal and social. I'm not necessarily saying to cut yourself off from everything that's happening in society. I'm saying if you're doing it so much that it's affecting the way you think, talk, and act, then you might want to course correct in some way, right? If you're constantly anxious, well, like you don't want to take that into your journey, right? You don't want to, dietas are important, right? Like managing the food that we eat is important before ceremony. We know this, but the yogis knew that the food that we eat is everything that we take in through all of our senses. So it's not just whether you're eating organic, it's, are you consuming organic media, right? Or are you looking at things that are beautiful and useful and true, right? And so those three things kind of go together, thought, word, and deed. There is, I think, a psalm even. Maybe it's from the Song of Solomon, or maybe it's a psalm, I don't know. May the words of our mouths and the meditation of our hearts be acceptable in your sight. which I think is a great prayer. And whoever your is, you know, you can pick what you mean when you say you. I don't care. So then right livelihood. So this is taking it again into the social, right? So, you know, are we figuring out a way to make a living and participate in the world in a way that is compassionate? Dude, Sarita with the deep cut. Nice. 1914. Good job. Wow. Maybe you'll recite the whole thing for us after the talk. That'd be awesome if you're comfortable with that. So again, right livelihood. Like, are you doing something that is where you're benefiting others as well, right? You're socially responsible. Davis Bible College. I don't know where I'm. Davis, California, perhaps. So then, right diligence is consistent. You know, is like we're being consistent, and so it's consistent where we are constantly checking. Like, am I planting the right seeds? Like, am I the right seeds of thought? Am I, if I catch myself judging somebody else, can I redirect myself to compassion? If I'm judging myself, can I redirect myself towards compassion, right? Can I interrupt myself when I'm doing things that are not the best for me? And can I double down? Cool. What did I want to say? I wanted to work and remind me, I kind of skipped it, but remind me if I forget to work in kind of mindful consumption. Come back to that. You know, that goes along with both media and just craving in general. So consistency is like we have to kind of be watchful and diligent. We have to be on guard in some ways for the way our mind goes this way or that way. This is one of the cool things, right, about psychedelics that you may have noticed is that our motivations become much more clear, right? So a lot of us have like unconscious motivations. It's like, why did you do that? I don't know. I just did it, right? Nobody just did anything, right? Nobody just does anything, right? Right? Is that there's all of this stuff going on underneath the surface. Right. So when we are consistent and vigilant and we slow things down, right? Because we're moving very, very fast, right? We're moving very, very fast. Do you remember why we're moving very, very fast? To try and get the things we want and to try and not get the things we don't want, right? So we're very ambitious about making things happen the way we want them to happen, right? And so when we slow down, that can start to catch up, right? And it can start to open up. And we recognize, oh, when I was doing that, I was motivated in this way. And it was this kind of fear. And it was this kind of thing. And like, oh, you know, I was really trying to work out this and make sure that I was safe and connected or what have you. And so that this, of course, brings us to right mindfulness, right? Mindfulness is a process of, first of all, kind of just stopping. Stop, right? So the first thing we do is we sit ourselves down, right? We just stop running around, right? And then we try to kind of stop thinking, at least consciously. Because a lot of times we're trying to figure something out, trying to figure out how to make more money, how to get people to do the things we want them to do, how to manage the stuff that we have so that we don't lose it. So the mind is constantly doing that. And then if we kind of allow it to watch the breath, we're going to watch the breath a little bit. And we're going to put down our ambitions for a moment. The other thoughts that were under them start to come up, right? And so we start to see the pile of unprocessed thoughts and emotions. There's just piles of old garbage that we haven't fully worked out yet, right? And so mindfulness is the practice of saying, huh, isn't that interesting? And it's like, okay. And yes, and finding enough space and having enough compassion, having kind of enough groundedness to be like, okay, yeah, yeah, okay, there's my anger, and okay, there's my shame, okay, there's my fear, and there's the story that I thought, um, oh, I thought that this happened this way. Um, a lot of our past can get remarkably reframed when we start to establish ourselves in compassion. It's like, oh, that person did that. Okay, I can kind of see where they're coming from now. I still didn't like that it happened. Still a bummer, but like it's less torturous for me now. So we become present to what is. And the thing is, we're like, oh, that's in the past. That just shouldn't matter. It's in the past. But it's in the present. It comes up if it comes up in your mindfulness meditation, it's literally present for you. And so the idea is like, can you remain present and be with it and see what it wants to tell you? What can you learn from the experience? Right? So you're there you are, you're tripping out on your past. Past comes up. What can I learn from this? How can I become selfless around this? And then you let it dissipate. Right? And the thing about that is that requires a certain amount of concentration. Right? So we sit and we allow things to come up and we stay present for it and we don't let ourselves get lost. Don't wander off into another uncreative place, repetitive, uncreative place. And then this kind of the Eightfold Path is kind of a circle. Like I don't love that it's a list here. And I played with it, but I couldn't really make it look right. And this is kind of an impromptu talk, so it happened kind of quick. But right concentration leads us back to right view. Right? We sit and we stay with our mindfulness and we're diligent about planting seeds of positivity and not planting seeds of negativity. And then it brings us back to compassion, which inspires us to action. Right? And that's the gig. And so this can be applied to your life, both in and outside of psychedelic experience. And is that my last slide? There's probably more sales slides after this. Sorry about that. Yeah, so again, let's do this for 6 weeks. There's a coupon code. It's going to be awesome. It's going to be fun. Maybe Sky, who is here, I'll let him say a few words. Sky leads meditation on Monday morning. I lead meditation on Wednesday morning. There's the QR code again, but you can also go to TAM integration. You know how to find me. You got here, you'll be able to find me. And so with that, okay, we breezed through pretty quick. We made really good time. I am curious if there are questions or answers about anything that we've spoken about. If you have an experience that you would like to, if something happened, if you want to do a little integration, if something happened and you want to like run it through this system, we can look at that. If anything was unclear, I'm happy to elucidate it. If anybody has a question that seems like a tangent that's totally off track, I'm happy to entertain that as well.
This is perhaps more of a comment and not a question, but the way you describe the trip reminds me a lot of the way hikers sometimes will describe the trail
Mm,
as like a teacher and a thing where um like a lot of the times like new hikers like say there's like a rainy day, they can have a horrible day. And it's like it's one of those things where rain, like there can be a like soggy day, but there doesn't have to be suffering on
yes.
the trail, you know?
Yeah. I live on the Appalachian Trail, and I'm not like a hiker, but you know, some of the videos from Instagram are on the Appalachian Trail. It's just little, go in for an hour, get back to work. Um, And one of the hikers that I know, old time hikers, says you carry your fear on your back. It's like not just your pack that you're carrying you carry your fears on your back. And I think that that's really neat. And I think that's an astute point. Because yeah, you're face to face with reality when you're on the trail. With a lot of the extra stuff peeled off to the sides. The Buddha talks about the second arrow, right? He says, the first arrow is like the rain or the pain, right? So, something how you fall, you hit your knee, right? And it's painful, but then we hate it. And that's the second arrow. Like we don't want it to be that way. Are you a hiker?
Yes, yes. Yeah, and the doing the AT is like a life goal.
Mm. Yeah. Let me know when you hit Massachusetts.
Sure thing.
Oh, Sky Double is doing double duty. He's tripping and hiking at the same time. I think it's nice too. So, other comments or questions, reflections? Anybody think I'm wrong? Does anybody think I'm wrong about any of this?
I have a question.
Sure, Wayne.
Um, for the last maybe 6 or months or a year, in my meditations, I've been experiencing craving.
Mm.
It just I've just gotten tuned into just like I guess raw craving, and it has no target or it's just there.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with this? And I mean, I
Mhm.
guess I need to kind of track it back to its source and see what it is I'm craving for, but I can't quite put
Mhm.
my finger on it.
Right. Well, the interesting thing about craving and hatred, and this is one of the, also, I say this is one of the things that I always say. One of my favorite things from hip hop culture is the phrase, haters gonna hate, because it makes it less about the object of hatred and more about the subject, more about us. We each have an inner craver and we each have an inner hater. And so whatever it is that you think you're craving, it's the craving precedes it as just a function of the mind. So it's not about like the object of the craving. It's about the function that the mind has craving. And in general, it comes from insecurity about the nature of being, right? So they say, right? I would tend to agree. Like when we feel like we're not in the Yoga Sutras, I'm jumping systems. Um, in the Yoga Sutras, they talk about renunciation, vairagya, and that is kind of the release of craving, like letting go of stuff. And they say that supreme vairagya, supreme renunciation, comes from a recognition that the self is enough, right? And so, like when we recognize that, like the brightness and the effulgence and the radiance and all of like the wonderful world, the sweetness of our being is like really a thing. Like when we are fully aware and recognizing that like we are where like you're where it's at. Like like where I am is where it's at. I forget who sang that. Um, then the craving will cease. So it's like, yeah, there's craving and it's cool to feel into it. And maybe it just needs love, and that's always a fun practice. Who's craving? Hey, what if I give you love? Would that help? Like it's never a bad thing to try. But like recognizing that, it's not like it's an ice cream shaped hole, right? How does that land for you as you hear me say that? Wayne, how's that land?
Yeah, so I guess a craver craves,
Yeah.
you're saying. and we're all cravers.
Hmm.
And sometimes I think this craving just is just there, and then we arbitrarily apply objects for it, thinking we'll satisfy it.
Yeah.
That craving is there, and then we try to get this, that, and the other thing, and then we get it, and then we're still not satisfied because that's not the thing we're really craving for, maybe. Sometimes I think it could be, craving for, uh, higher, maybe craving for love, like you're saying, and
Yeah.
maybe craving for something we call divine presence.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Well, you know what the cool thing about love is that like you just so happen to be a breath-powered love factory. So you can just make as much as you want. You heard it here first, folks. You're a breath-powered love factory.
Yeah.
And so if it's like, you get what you give, right? And so it's like, okay, I'm just gonna fill this room with like the vibrations of loving love and kindness. And I would be curious to see what happens with that craving.
Sometimes I do sit with the craving
Mm-hmm.
and just dive into it, and then
Yeah.
I'll feel peace. Eventually that clears out, and then there's peace,
Yeah.
calmness, and joy.
Yeah.
I keep repeating that. So I do it, that cycle repeats. I dive into the craving, and then
Yeah.
sometimes there's peace on the other side of it.
I mean, that would certainly make sense, right? Because we didn't really rap about impermanence yet, right? But part of the problem with the whole system that creates a lot of the suffering is that things keep changing in unpredictable ways at random times, seemingly. So the thing about that's also to our benefit is that um, craving's impermanent. Like craving's not an eternal thing in our system. It kind of comes and it goes. But peace and joy, so they say, like that's the eternal stuff, right? So part of the thing we meditate to kind of like let the craving kind of one of my teachers say self-liberate back into space. So the craving comes up and it does our thing, and we neither grasp at it, we don't grasp at the grasping, and neither do we reject the grasping. But we're like, okay, you're here now. What do you got? What's going on? I mean, it's like I'm not necessarily going to participate in you, but I'm here, and you can do your craving thing. It's okay. It's safe to crave, and then it craves until it's done craving. You know, it's not going to last forever. And this brings us right. Catherine reminded me to talk about mindful consumption, right? So the craving is like not mindful consumption, right? It's compulsive. It's compulsive consumption. And so we are constantly, I had a student once who said, I buy shoes. And I was like, oh, okay, cool, you buy shoes. Um, she was like, I really like my shoes. And I was like, okay, that's cool. It's like, I don't have, it's like, I probably don't have as many shoes as you have, but I like my shoes too. She goes, I'm afraid that if I meditate and I do this stuff, that like I'm not going to be allowed to buy shoes anymore. And I had to assure her, I was like, I have no say. I have no opinion on the amount of shoes that you buy. I don't know what your finances are like. I don't know what your closet space is like. You know, what I would just suggest is that if you meditate before you go to the shoe store, um, I bet you make better choices. Maybe it's even just clear which shoe is better for you at the time being. I don't know if anybody's ever like bought a thing. Has anybody ever like bought a thing and then like buyer's remorse is a term. Anybody ever like buy a thing and you're like, I don't want this thing. What am I going to do with this thing? So yeah, probably have something like that, like within grasping distance. Yeah, I'm pretty organized today. But so much of what is kind of wrong with, not to, I don't want to get too societal or ecological, but a lot of what's kind of going on, a lot of the problems in our world in general would be solved by mindful consumption, by recognizing like, oh, and that doesn't just mean like buying too much stuff, right? It's kind of being like mindful ambition, like knowing why you're trying to get a thing in general, whether it's, achieve a thing, or to, develop a relationship, or to, have stuff to eat. If we were more mindful about that, we'd be more peaceful. Our relationships would be easier. It's like, oh, I was talking about, you know, the Fawn response. Do you guys know the Fawn response? So in general, like we have we've got habitual responses, and the big two are fight and flight, right? We all know fight and flight. Kind of fight, I don't like, I'm gonna run away. But then sometimes there's Fawn, right? And that's a little more complicated. And that's kind of when we feel kind of uneasy, and our knee-jerk response is to try and placate others, or put them before ourselves, or make them okay, or kind of like, oh, right, defer. And Amelia, okay, okay, good to see you. Glad you're here. I was going to ask you for a testimonial for class, but okay, so it goes. So kind of getting in there, like trying, like the compulsive need to try and make a thing okay somehow would fit under this, because it's not mindful behavior, right? You're trying to get a thing to play out the way you want it to play, instead of looking at like, oh, perhaps there's another way of seeing this. There's another way to respond to this that is kind of more mindful, centered in my body, and so on and so forth. And so mindful consumption is, consuming objects, of course, so consuming natural resources, but perhaps also consuming relationships or outcomes, results, things like that, being a little less grasping about trying to make things happen the way we want. Cool. Yeah, it's a great term. That's a Thich Nhat Hanh term. I heard that from him. Thoughts, questions? All right. Well, this was super fun. I'm glad you guys came. Thank you for being here. I hope that you and all of your loved ones have happy minds, have the causes of happiness. I hope that you and all of your loved ones are free from suffering and the causes of suffering. If you have questions about 6-week class, please feel free to shoot me an email. And I'll see you on the gram. Be well.
Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you.